But Stefan Livera was on the stage already. He is, just to remind you, he is running his own podcast, visiting us from Dubai, has been involved in some banking before, but here we are now. The next one is going to be Kukks. He's a CTO at Ark Labs. By the way, he's calling himself on X the evil scientist. I found that very funny. And Steven Roose, he's CEO at Second, and he calls himself on X libertarian socialist Bitcoiner. Enjoy the chat.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Ark. I know there's it's not going to be like an antagonistic panel, but it's just going to be more like let's hear your perspectives on, L2s and what's being enabled by Ark, and self-custody and these kinds of things. So I guess just for people to understand, there's different forms of Ark, so just kind of take a minute each and just kind of explain a bit of your vision of Ark and what you see it achieving for Bitcoin users. Do you want to start?
I can start, yeah. I think Ark is very exciting. It's been Lightning. Lightning has been our focus for Bitcoin payments for many years, and Lightning works very well. But we've noticed many pains on the user experience, mostly for end users. So I think Ark is one of the most exciting things that's happening in the Bitcoin space. I think it's going to drive the UX for Bitcoin payments forward by a big leap. And I guess as you hear from both of us, it's going to happen soon, and I think we're all going to benefit a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So at Ark Labs, we are building Arkade, basically an operating system for Bitcoin, powered by the Ark concepts and primitives that we've been working on and researching for a while. I would say our direction is more around a general purpose Bitcoin scripts layer. We want to execute not just payments. That's a subset of a purpose of what we deliver, but also doing general contracts. So, for example, escrow, plenty of other things too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some of these things. I think. So if I think through. Okay, let me put it this way. What are some uses that you would say are being done now, either in an inefficient way or maybe in a custodial way, that could be done with Ark? So maybe, actually, Steven, probably good for you to expand on. I think your team put out some work, some research on, let's say you're stacking sats and you want to withdraw from the exchange, and I think people have spoken about in the past that Lightning was inefficient for this, or that it just maybe it wasn't exactly the right fit for this, because a lot of the, let's say, the DCA stacker use case, it didn't really make sense for them unless they were earning and spending, and many of them were not, they're just stacking. So I think you did some research, or your team. Can you expand a bit?
Yeah, so one of the properties of Lightning is that you need to have channels, right? And a channel has a certain capacity. So depending on your payment patterns, these channels will be a good fit or will be a bad fit. And there's specific patterns where people are only sending out or only receiving. For example, DCAers, they're only receiving, and Lightning really doesn't fit that box, because you always need to increase your own capacity, your incoming capacity, which comes with on-chain costs. So yeah, that's, like you said, that's one of the areas where I think Ark is a very good fit, because exchanges or DCA providers can simply make a single on-chain payment and deliver hundreds or thousands of off-chain payments to their users, and the users don't need to have inbound capacity. They can just keep receiving these things passively without any on-chain costs, or at least on-chain costs are shared among all the users in the Ark, right? And so,
sorry, just on that, I don't know if you know the exact numbers, but I think you were trying to comment on the cost efficiency of doing that. Maybe you could elaborate on that.
What exactly do you mean?
As in, it was more efficient to do it this way than to, let's say, pay out every user on-chain, especially for smaller amounts?
Yeah, so most DCA providers, I think, right now work on-chain, right? So you send a certain amount every month, and the provider gives you an on-chain payment every month. So you pay a fee that is more than €1 or more than €2 every month, just to receive your whatever amount of money you want for that month. So with Ark, you can flatten that out. So the DCA provider can pay a single on-chain fee, and everyone in their service can receive their payment for that month. With Lightning, it's a little bit more tricky to calculate because, for example, you do 100 a month, right? You get a channel with 500 capacity for 5 months. You can get kind of a free off-chain payment. But then when your capacity is full or like run out, then you need to make another on-chain payment just for yourself to increase your inbound capacity.
And then it means you're hitting the chain so many more times, you're now paying on-chain fees way more, so it's just not as efficient. Kukks, do you want to expand from your perspective? Do you have a similar concept there, or you're thinking of it in a different way?
I would say that in general, like we've seen most on-chain use cases kind of slowly diminishing away and being kind of converted into like non-Bitcoin services, or actually there's still Bitcoin related services, but they've been kind of moved into like a TradFi situation where they're just running on a centralized server somewhere with custodian-based solutions. And I think we can actually bring it all back to Bitcoin. At least one big thing that Ark enables is being able to do all the Bitcoin script use cases again off-chain for instant feedback, and basically low cost effectiveness. We can basically reconnect the payment use case to it as well. Lightning is something that most people have been trying to integrate, and for the most part works on a corporate level. Like if you're a business, you can run it on a server and hire people to manage it for you. But I do see it as kind of very hard for a consumer to actually operate. And through Arkade and through swap providers such as Boltz that we have a partnership with, we can offer the same experience as a custodian without being custodians.
And so I guess what you're getting at there is the user can interact in Bitcoin without having to think about all these kind of complicated things. The idea is to kind of put all that complicated stuff in the background, and the user just has his app and he can just receive. And on the front, and let's say he wants to take a payment, the person paying him might see a Lightning invoice, right? Because the other side can see a Lightning invoice. He's paying Lightning, and then in the background, it's being flipped into like an Ark, like using like Boltz.exchange and so on. It's being flipped into like an Ark VTXO that the user is holding in his Arkade app. Is that broadly what's happening?
I mean, yeah, pretty much. I would say that in the back end, it's going to be an Arkade, basically VTXOs in your wallet. And with VTXOs, you've got Bitcoin scripts, the same Bitcoin primitives that you have on Bitcoin, which enables all the things that existing Bitcoin and Lightning wallets do, which is HTLCs, for example. If you can do HTLCs, you can do Lightning interoperability natively. And that's one thing that swap providers offer. So Lightning interoperability comes basically for free, no crazy magic that needs to happen on top of Arkade.
When you talk about hiding the complexity from the user, I think Lightning wallets also do that, right? So Lightning wallets will not talk about like channels and stuff as much, but at some point you hit some limit. Like if you want to receive a 500 euro payment, you don't have the inbound capacity. The app needs to show you something, and it's going to say like, you cannot receive this, we first need to do something and then you can receive it, right? So with Ark, you also have a lot of stuff that the user needs to do, but they can happen in the background because they can happen asynchronously. They don't have to happen when you suddenly receive a payment that's too large. Like for example, in Ark, you have to refresh your VTXOs periodically, but your app can just wake up and do it in the background. It doesn't have to tell you. Like it's not like you want to make or receive a payment and suddenly it says, oh, we first need to go and do this kind of stuff. So I think it's better at hiding the technological parts or the technical parts from the user than when you're hitting channel capacity in Lightning.
And speaking of cost, I think this is the other thing. So people might be familiar that the Ark server or the coordinator may have some cost that they're paying. Can you guys elaborate a bit on your perspectives there? What does that look like, and how does that get presented to the user, or is it kind of like, you know, the user is just using his app, the end user, and then maybe the app user, the app developer, maybe he's taking a cut somewhere, and then the Ark server is taking a small cut somewhere for the refreshing. Can you explain your concept there?
Yeah, sure. So from our perspective, we're focusing on doing a fee structure, a very dynamic fee structure on the settlement phase, meaning when you're creating a new batch with new VTXOs or swapping your old VTXOs for a new one, we'll have a fee structure there in terms of based on demand, based on a dynamic policy, whether you want to accelerate getting the batch faster, whether you want to pay less and wait for somebody else to sponsor it for you. And that's basically the Ark operator's responsibility to figure out. But then on the developer side of things, they can build any kind of fee structure they want. They can offer services on top and collect money that way. We also have a new delegator system which allows asynchronous refresh of the VTXOs, which you can charge as a wallet provider. The sky's the limit. Where Bitcoin script is kind of re-enabled here. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like the cost that you have as a service provider or as a server, you're gonna have to recoup it somehow, but you can pretty well, like, people are using your service making payments, right? So they're used to paying a fee for that. I think one of the difficulties we might have with Ark, like Kukks is also saying, we also have a cost when the user is like refreshing or swapping their VTXOs into new ones. And right now users are not really used to like paying fees when they're not making payments, right? So we have like a tricky balance to play there. Are we gonna charge for payments which are actually mostly free for the server? Or are we going to charge a fee for refreshes, which are costly for the server, but then the user has this like...
Because he's not used to that, right? If you're
yeah.
thinking in TradFi, it's like, oh, I've got my PayPal balance or I've got my bank account balance. He's not used to thinking, oh, I need to pay a certain amount every month as like a channel lease or an Ark refresh cost. So I think that's what you're getting at there, this tension of like, how do you actually structure it? So what's your kind of thinking there on how to structure that cost?
Yeah, we're doing research into like what exists in the space, what are the usual things that people are used to paying. We're also thinking now about subscription models potentially, but they come with like all the kinds of other technical challenges. We have a lot of freedom, so we can just start playing. Like we're gonna like implement like they're gonna do like a very dynamic fee structure where we can tweak the knobs and say maybe users like this more, maybe users like this more. From our perspective, payments are free, but refreshes are very costly. But maybe we can like charge a fee on the payment and then like subsidize some
and
of
just
the
make enough on the payments that you don't have to charge the
I think it's going to be getting a lot of user feedback, like what they like, what they don't like, and yeah, so you can go from there.
I mean, just thinking out loud, I mean, my guess is most users today are used to a transactional fee, or, I mean, think about like fiat no coiners. What are they doing? They're taking out their credit card and they're tapping. And actually the cost is like, let's say they're buying a coffee, the cafe guy is the one paying the fee. Yeah. So that's the current model. The cost is built in on the merchant side.
It's kind of, if you do it on the receiving side, where you do all the Ark transactions for free, and the receiver is just receiving VTXOs, you have to settle them at some point. So that's actually like you settle at the end of the day of a high volume transaction day. And that's exactly the flow you're describing. I would prefer to not have fees on every transaction that happens inside the Ark because it adds friction. It adds kind of like, oh, what happened here? Why is my, I sent 1,000 sats, now it's a bit less. And you have to kind of account for that. And the mental model gets kind of shaky, I would say, to the end user. So being able to just have an unbounded transaction flow and then at the end, based on user decision themselves, be able to just decide, okay, I've made enough money, I feel comfortable to do this, let me just do it before the expiry.
Now, one area I want to touch on is kind of the competitive aspect between the different L2s out there, right? Now, of course, let 1,000 flowers bloom. I want as many people to use Bitcoin as possible, right? But we've got, there's Lightning, there's Liquid, and I know you used to work with Liquid and Blockstream. So there's Lightning, there's Liquid, there's Ark, there's different forms of Ark, there's RGB, there's Spark now. So can you guys just spell out where do you see the advantages of using an Ark style compared to these other L2s that exist?
I think it's very important to first make a big distinction around self-custody, right? So things like Spark have like a different trust model than Ark. So like Ark is in the box of Lightning where you're like fully self-custodial and where like you have a strong focus, and it comes of course with technical challenges as well. But then you have things where you go a little bit further where you have things like Spark, and personally I would put the sidechains a little bit in that bucket as well. Definitely Liquid, but also the new BitVM style sidechains where there's a little bit more trust involved, or sometimes a lot more trust involved. So yeah,
because they have like a one of n honesty assumption in the BitVM roll-up style. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if there's users who really value their self-custody, especially if it's around larger amounts and stuff like that, I think Ark will definitely have a very big use case there. Maybe some users who just want to like play around with like small euros when they're doing a game or something like that. Maybe those more custodial solutions will have a bigger market. But I think the market for purely self-custodial Bitcoin is big enough, and I think Ark will be the leading player there.
So you view it like, we're going to make self-custody UX so much better that more people are actually going to do it compared to today, where sadly, a lot of users are using custodial. And as I said, look, people start how they start. Sometimes they start with custodial, sometimes they start with other things. But I guess the journey, we want to get more people using self-custodial, right? How do you see this competition between the L2s, Kukks?
I feel like we're in a very unique position at this point, as Ark and Arkade technologies are kind of brand new, and we have like kind of like the ability to do scripting and off-chain execution and even interoperability with Lightning. That's great. I think the UTXO model that we have, just because we're based on Bitcoin, is superior to any of the EVM solutions that are popping out, simply because we can parallelize execution of contracts. We don't have to have a global state. We can express our flows in a much more deterministic manner. And with Arkade, especially, we actually have built an extension to being able to execute additional opcodes and be able to compete on an expressive level. The trust model is very unique, I would say. There is nuance, of course. Being able to do transactions inside the Ark does follow a state chain trust assumption, but we have the killer feature of being able to jump out of that trust assumption at the user's discretion at any time and point of their ownership of VTXOs. And I think that allows you to switch from a state chain trust assumption to a Bitcoin finality level of trust.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got a couple minutes left for the last question or topic. I would like you guys to, for the people in the audience or people watching the stream or the recording later, make your pitch. Why should a developer or a builder today, who might otherwise have just used a custodial thing, think about using Ark? So make your pitch.
Yeah, I think if you're using self-custodial Lightning, you're gonna have a bigger market of people that want to use it. Like, there's people who just don't want to give their money to a custodial, especially if they're talking about lots of money, especially if they're talking about jurisdictions that, for example, are contrary to where the custodial is. There's things that for example, if you're in certain countries, you just cannot be a custodial with certain custodials that are requiring KYC, for example, stuff like that. So like at Second, we're building an Ark platform called Bark, and it's just what we're focusing on is just making it as easy as possible for anyone to just develop an app, use the SDKs to be able to make Lightning payments, Ark payments, on-chain payments as well, and just making it seamless, like not bugging our integrators or our users with things like channels, things like capacities. The integrators, so the people building the wallets and the apps, can take care of almost anything, like when the user is going to refresh, when the user is going to do all its like maintenance, and then the user will just see like a wallet that works seamlessly.
Yeah, I feel like we've hit a point in time where the UX with self-custodial Bitcoin wallets with Arkade is basically just as smooth as a custodial wallet, and you avoid the regulatory burden, the headaches that come with that, and the trust assumptions that your users have to make to actually use your services. We're at a point where we can actually offer almost most services, at least that custodians are offering, without the same trust, basically, consequence.
Yeah, so I think it's fascinating to see that we've seen this advancement in L2s. Like for a long time, it was kind of Lightning only was the true L2, and now we've got Ark. Hopefully, we'll see exchanges start using Ark for payouts, or even just custodial. Like so many apps and websites, even today, are just kind of a custodial thing. Whether it's, I don't know, like a poker website or whatever, or even like Nostra stuff. There's a lot of these uses where right now the default is just kind of, custodial, because that's just easy, quote unquote. But to the point you guys are making, maybe from a regulatory standpoint, it's easier. Maybe it feels slick now. So I think it behooves builders and developers to actually think about this now and be like, hey, actually, Ark is an option.
it was very hard to start integrating with as a Bitcoin wallet nowadays, because Lightning is very complex. Anybody that wanted to just show you a balance on the app had to do a whole amount of work to get a Lightning node working in the true cypherpunk way. Now we can offer that, at least. That's why everyone started doing a balance where you deposit to and you have a custodial balance, and that's how you function. Because nobody could invest a year of work building just this part of their application. They have things to do. They have a business to run.
All right, well, I think that's all we've got time for. So Steven Roose from Second and Kukks from Ark Labs Arkade. Thank you.